just a little bit of context around Think Local Act Personal. We're a partnership, a network, and we're really driven by the idea that everyone should have the care and support they need to be able to live life their way. As a partnership, we then work to make sure everybody can get the care and support they need to be able to live the life well and do more of what matters to them. We do this in partnership and in co-production. So we're an equal space, an equal forum for people who draw on care and support to meet with policymakers and government, local authorities, health professionals, social workers, whoever has a part to play in making that a reality. So we're very much driven by personalisation, but very much giving people agency, choice, control over their own lives and through the care and support that they receive. Okay, the next slide, please, Jane. Today's event is specific, so we're looking at aging without children. So I just wanted to explain why we're doing today's session and how that fits into TLAP's wider work. So we believe that everybody has the right to have choice and control over their care and support. And we've articulated what good personalised care and support looks like through our Making It Real statements. And in the chat, we'll make sure there's a link to the Making It Real for those people who aren't familiar with it. But that is a series of I statements and we statements that define what good personalised care looks like. The work of TLAP is really to understand how do we make that happen in the real world. And we have a series of work stream themes for over the next year or so that looks at different ways and aspects of bringing that into reality. The reason we're doing today's event is really for this equity work stream, so the one in green here, which is recognising that TLAP itself doesn't hear from everybody who has reason and cause to draw on care and support. And if we don't hear from people, then we don't bring that into our own thinking, we don't bring that into the co-production and the policy setting and the planning for about how we improve care and support more generally. So we've started this work stream where we're identifying groups who we want to hear more from and gain those insights. And we want to make that a learning experience and connect lots of different people to new information, new insights, so that as well as TLAP benefiting from that, everybody can too. And Aging Without Children is the first of a series of events that is going to be exploring what does good personalised care look like from the perspective of people we don't necessarily hear from very often or aren't so heavily factored into our thinking and work. Next slide, please. To bring today's event together, this has been done very much in partnership, and we've worked closely with a range of partners to bring today's event together, all of which are on the slide here. Special mention to Angela from Community Catalysts, who kickstarted this whole event, really. It's amazing what can happen on a Twitter conversation and where that might snowball and lead to. But also many thanks to the planning group who came together around those early exchanges on social media. So in particular, Innovations with Dementia, Sheffield Hallam University, Coalition for Personalised Care, and of course, Kirsty and the team at Aging Without Children themselves. We're going to hand over now to Kirsty, who's going to do a sort of plenary presentation about some of the learning and insights that they have around the specific issues and interests of people aging without children, before we then go into breakout groups and look at some of the issues in more detail. So Kirsty, could I ask you first of all to introduce yourself, and then we'll go over to your presentation.
Hi. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, everybody. It's absolutely brilliant to be here. Thank you so much to TLAP and Community Catalysts for all the work that they've done pulling this webinar together. I'm Kirsty Woodard. Some people may also know me as Kirsty Staunton, but I tend to use Woodard for my work around aging without children. And I'm the founder of Aging Without Children, which was something that I started to think about around 10 years ago. And I was again sort of thinking about, you know, how did we sort of get here? And it kind of really started when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine at Age UK. So I've worked on issues around age and aging for about 30 years. And I was having coffee with my friend from Age UK, and she was talking to me about the difficulties that she was having with her mother's care in hospital. And she was going up there every day, sometimes twice, 3 times a day, because, you know, how it is, there were lots of you know, lots of questions that need answering, lots of information. You know, she was helping her mum with, you know, her food. She was kind of, you know, helping her mum if like her call bell wasn't being answered and all of that. And obviously she was talking to social services about her discharge and everything. And then when her mother was discharged home with a care package, the care package didn't really work as it should. They put a hoist in, but only half of the hoist actually got delivered. And when she phoned social services, they were like, oh, sorry, we can't get you the other bit of it for about a week. But if you can drive over to the depot on the other side of the borough, you can pick it up. So that was what she did. They only put one carer in because of the hoist, but again, the kind of whole care package fell apart fairly quickly. And her mother unfortunately ended up back in hospital. And one of the things that she was saying, so she was kind of, I'll be honest, she was kind of venting entirely understandably about all of the things that had gone wrong and how difficult it was all being. And at the end of it, what she said to me is, God knows what my mum would do if I wasn't here. And it was that real kind of light bulb moment of, yeah, what would your mum have done if you hadn't have been there? And that kind of got me thinking, because it was about at that time myself that I was kind of coming to terms with the fact that I would never be able to have children myself. And even though by that point I'd been working with older people and issued around aging for around 20 years, I started to think about, yeah, what would happen? What would happen to me in my later life? You know, what happens to people, and what are some of the things we might be able to do about it? And I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll talk to some of the people that I know and ask them if this has ever come up anywhere. And when I talked to the people that I knew, people like Dr. Mervyn Eastman from who had been head of Better Government for Older People, and some other people I knew at Age UK and various other people. And I said, has this come up anywhere? And they were like, no, not really, not in that sense. So I wrote a blog about it and that was picked up by The Guardian. And out of that kind of grew AWOC, because it became clear quite quickly that it wasn't really an issue that anybody had thought about in a very systemic way. It wasn't something that had really been articulated actually there is this group of people who may not have family support for lots of different reasons. And actually we need to think about this in terms of people's later life. So together with some people, we kind of formed a group, and for the best part of the last 10 years, we've been campaigning around getting the issues that affect people aging without children into mainstream thinking around age and aging and later life and all of that. So next slide, please. So one of the things I think it's useful to talk about is definitions, because whenever we talk about aging with children, people automatically think we mean people who don't have any children at all. But actually, it's much broader than that. So yes, people who have no children at all, whether that's through their own choice, whether that's through infertility, whether that's through circumstances such as they are the partner of someone who's unable to have children. Yes, so all the people who have no children at all. But then when we started, we would be contacted by people who said, well, actually, I think I'm aging without children because although I have a child, they live in Australia. So on a practical day-to-day level, yes, I'm in contact with them, but they're not here. So I think of myself as aging without children. There are people who contacted and said, I'm estranged from my children. I haven't seen them for years. Other people who got in contact with me and said, actually, my children are dead. So there was lots and lots of different groups of people that we thought, actually, all of these people come under this banner of people who, for whatever reason, are not going to be able to rely on that support in their later life. So we use it in 3 different ways. People who have no children at all, people whose children are unable to offer help and support, and people whose children are unwilling for whatever reason to offer help and support. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about aging without children is how difficult it is to find out how many people are aging without children, because the only definite information that is recorded through the census is the number of women who are not mothers. So we don't actually record the number of men who don't become fathers, for example. So the only thing the census can really tell us is how many people how many people don't have children at all. It can't really capture those other groups that I talked about. And the lack of really strong data is one of the real challenges that we have at AWOC, because all the numbers that we talk about, we think are quite conservative estimates of people, because we think there's actually a much bigger group of people who are aging without children, but we can't actually get our hands on the data. So as always, our plea is, more data, more information, we really need it. But what we have been able to glean is, so we estimate that there are about 1.5 million people over 65 in the UK who are not parents. That's a phenomenally large number of people, of older people, that haven't really been visible in policy and planning around aging. There's been some recent academic research that's been done that suggests that people aging without children are up to 1/3 more likely to be a carer for their own parents, which is interesting in two ways. One, we often talk about the sandwich generation of people who are caring for their teenage children and also their parents. But we think there is also an issue around what I call the tightrope generation, which is people who are caring for their parents who have no safety net of their own. The second thing about it is that it is often when people become a carer for their own parents, when they're aging without children, that they start to come to AWOC and say, oh my goodness, I had no idea how complicated the health and social care systems. So it's very kind of difficult to for them to kind of, they start to think about, well, what will happen to me? There's research that suggests people aging without children are 25% more likely to go into care homes. Again, that doesn't get talked about very much. When in COVID, lots of the conversations around care homes were always about people being separated from their families. There wasn't really much talk about, well, what happens from people who aren't, don't even have families. We know that there is an evidence that there will be an 80% increase in older people who are single without children and who have a disability by 2032. We estimate that 4 million people over 50 have no children at all. So this is a problem that is only going to get larger. It is an issue that is only going to get larger, because it isn't always a problem. And research by the ONS indicates that by 2045, there will be 3 times as many people over 80 without children as there are now. Next slide, please. So what's the impact of this? And again, when we were kind of, all of this is stuff that we have learned as we have gone on, because when we started, we were very much like, nobody's really looking at this. So everything we've learned is as we go along. So there's kind of 2 things. One is the emotional impact. Now, not everybody aging without children is unhappy about aging without children. There are lots of people who have chosen never to have children, and they've arrived at their later life without children, and they're really, really happy. They're really happy about the fact that they don't have children, because that's what they wanted. That doesn't lessen the potential impact of them in later lives. There's a feeling of invisibility, that they don't exist anywhere in conversations around aging. I mean, again, this was very prevalent in COVID, where there was lots of conversations about, get granny on Zoom and all the kind of conversations about care homes, but there was no kind of talk about, what about older people who don't have any family? There's a different experiences of different groups. So men who are aging without children, obviously, the experience of LGBTQ plus people, which I think is being picked up in one of the breakout rooms later to have more of a focus on that. Because one of the things that's particularly interesting is that, again, the statistics around the LGBTQ plus population, the only statistics I was able to find suggested that around 90% of older LGBTQ plus people don't have children or fit within the aging without children group. And so, plus we have all the issues about people having to go back into the closet in their later life, issues around care homes. So there is a huge issue around that. And that feeling of isolation and exclusion, this comes up in our Facebook group. quite a lot, where people would say, I felt excluded because I wasn't a parent. And now people are having their grandchildren. I'm excluded all over again because people are talking about their grandchildren. I couldn't talk about children. I can't talk about grandchildren. I'm excluded again. I'm isolated. And then there was a whole thing about practical support, particularly need for advocacy. People were talking about, you know, it's not so much that I would ever have expected any child that I might have had to be providing personal care, but what I would like is some advocacy, some support, so that people are there to speak up for me, particularly if I'm in a position of not being able to speak up for myself. Some simple things like an emergency point of contact. We've had people who said, I actually couldn't go into hospital and have an operation because there was nobody who could go home with me. There was nobody who could be an emergency point of contact. And then the help with everyday practical tasks. Because again, a lot of times when I've talked about aging without children, people have said to me, oh, but I don't want my children to look after me. And people have said, and I always say, brilliant. I can count on the fingers of one hand people who've said to me, I really want my children to look after me. But what people really mean is, I don't want my children providing personal care. They don't tend to mean things like, I don't want my children to give me a lift to the hospital. I don't want my children to maybe help with the shopping if I can't do it. I don't want my children to try and sort out this website because I'm struggling with technology. So there's a whole piece of there around low-level practical tasks, where you don't meet the threshold for social care support, but there isn't anybody else to help. Next slide, please. But as I said, it's not all doom and gloom. I think one of the interesting things research has shown, people aging without children are more likely to be to volunteer and participate in community activities. People aging without children tend to have a wider network of friends and a good relationship with their wider kin. So they may not have children or grandchildren, but they have good relationships with nieces, nephews, cousins, etc. And we know that people aging without children are more likely to leave money to charity. Next slide, please. So why does any of this matter? There's a couple of things. I think we're all very familiar with the challenges around particularly social care at the moment. We know that people aging without children are much more likely to need paid care for services than those with family support. Just at a time when paid for social care services are really, really struggling. You know, we don't have the carers, we don't have the services. Service providers will need to understand more about all the different stories of people aging without children, all the different people who fit under that banner, so that they can better design services to meet those needs and provide more of them so that they can meet the increased demand. And we all know the impact of inequalities on aging and the adverse effect of being isolated, if you're lonely, if you have poor health, poor support networks, and low income. And we know that people aging without children fall disproportionately into many of those groups as well. Next slide, please. So what can we do about it? We can ensure that we better understand the issues facing people aging without children and all the different reasons why they're aging without children, all the different people who fall into that group. We can ensure people aging without children are included when services are being planned or reviewed. And when we're designing services, that we don't make the assumption that somebody is going to have an adult child who's just going to sort things out. Because often, although that won't be explicitly written into a service or a policy, there is often thinking underneath it is basically that there will be somebody who will kind of sort this out, that there will be somebody who will kind of liaise between services, make things happen, fill things out. There will be that sort of person. That we can ensure our services are AWOT confident, and I'm going to go and talk about this in a minute, and that we ensure that all older people are helped to plan for their later life. I mean, this is something that we do talk about a lot, is how can we all, whether we have children or whether we're aging without children, whether we're not, how can we ensure that older people can plan better for their later life? Next slide, please. So this is the Ageing Without Children Toolkit, which we worked on with the National Care Forum. I'm not going to go into huge detail about this because it's in the it's going to be covered in the breakout group on social care. Next slide. But just to say, this is the definition of an AWOC confident organisation that the working group that put together the toolkit came up with. So an organisation where people ageing without children are understood, included and supported. In an AWOC confident organisation, staff and volunteers will be aware of and understand the issues affecting people ageing without children and ensure they feel included and confident to access support, participate in activities and the community, and able to raise concerns without fear of judgment and exclusion. And one of the reasons that we put that last bit in is often when people talk about their fears and concerns around ageing without children, whatever route it was that they became ageing without children, often they will be shut down. Often those concerns and fears will be hand waved away. Oh, you know, oh, I don't expect my children to look after me. Oh, I wouldn't worry about it. Oh, it's not going to be a problem. And people therefore don't voice those fears. And that is a real problem. Next slide, please. The toolkit includes a self-assessment checklist, so it's a very practical tool where organisations can work through some of the issues around their strategy, information, their assessments, how they deliver their services, and staff training and support, because many people who work in health and social care are over 50, which means a large proportion of those people will also be ageing without children as well. So that also needs to be considered as well as part of our employment, is how do we also be aware of people ageing without children who are working for our own organisations. Next slide. And finally, I think this is really important. If we improve things for people ageing without children, we make everything better for all older people. Most carers that I talk to who are supporting their parents are exhausted. You know, they're running on empty, and actually what they'd really like is to spend some time with their parents where they would just spend time with them, having a nice time, you know, going out doing nice things. They can't because they're run ragged trying to support them, find services, etc. If we make services and if we make things improve for people ageing without children, it will improve things for all older people. Thank you very much.